My name is Olivia. I'm 23 years old. I have an official diagnosis of bipolar disorder. I've been speaking with FFDA, which stands for Families for Depression Awareness, since I was about 18.
I'm Colin. I'm from Chicago, and I study at Northeastern University. I've been speaking with FFDA for about 3 years now, on and off.
I'm Emma. I'm a sophomore at Wellesley College, and I'm from Newton, Mass. I've been speaking with FFDA since I was about 17 or 18. I'm 22 now.
We're part of the Teen Speakers Program, and even though I'm not a teenager anymore, we focus our efforts towards speaking to teenagers, and we talk about our personal experience with mental illness. You know, you may not feel like you know anyone, or yourself, you may not relate to what's going on, but I want to promise you that you will someday meet someone who's affected by this. So I feel like it's just kind of important to have this information if you're ever to come across someone who has these issues.
So I first realized that I was depressed my freshman year of high school. I was studying at a new high school where I didn't know many people, so I just thought that might be why, but as it persisted and kept getting worse, I then slowly realized that something was wrong, but I still kind of didn't want to admit it to myself. It wasn't until about 3 or 4 months into high school when the suicidal thoughts started happening that I realized that something was really wrong, but I still had a very hard time admitting it.
I have post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and so I've felt depressed on and off since I was since childhood, so since I was like 9 or 10, and I first attempted suicide when I was 15 or 16. Things got a lot rougher for me when I entered high school.
The first person that I had told that I had depression was my high school girlfriend, and that wasn't until about probably 6 to 8 months into me having suicidal thoughts and coming close to attempting suicide. And when I first told her, it was very hard to even tell her, even though we had been very close. I had actually made her promise not to tell anybody else, telling her that if she had told somebody else, and that would definitely push me over and I would actually end up killing myself. So that prevented her from telling anybody, but it still was nice to have somebody to talk to about. It wasn't until 4 years later that I actually told my parents, and then they helped me seek professional help.
I first told my dad that I was depressed when I was in 10th grade, so I was 15. And he was very supportive. My parents happen to know a lot about mental health issues because they have family members who have depression or who have bipolar disorder. So I got really lucky there that they took my saying that I had all these feelings that I didn't know at the time, or that had a label that had said PTSD or anxiety or major depression, and they got me help from a social worker right away, and I soon started seeing a psychiatrist, and so I'm very grateful for that, and that was incredibly helpful.
First and most importantly, I'm medicated. It took me 2 tries to get the right medication, which is pretty lucky. It takes some people many more attempts to get the right medication. And then I also see a psychiatrist every 2 to 3 weeks, just to have somebody to talk to that's other than my friends or family. I exercise regularly, which to me is very important and helps me a lot. And I've, since coming out to my parents and telling them about my depression, have created a much more open relationship with them, telling them how I feel, and also my friends now have a much better idea of what's going on in my life and in my head.
So I went through a lot of therapists and a lot of medication until I found a medication that seemed to be helping me, and a therapist who I really felt comfortable talking to. So I got really frustrated at first, but it's definitely worth it once you find the right treatment. And realizing that just because one thing doesn't work doesn't mean that you can't keep on trying. Staying connected with friends, whether they be from high school or from college or from outside of school, and just even texting or calling people regularly and staying connected is really important.
I feel like a big part of why a lot of people don't reach out for help is because they feel like the treatment will be too difficult, or they're scared of it or something like that. I found that it was definitely not as hard as I thought it would be, and seeking treatment made it a lot easier to then deal with my anxiety and depression afterwards. So I feel like that's a point that we want to drive home, is the importance of reaching out for help is definitely not as bad as you may think it is.
The main reason that I do these talks and the panels is because I think just being up here and talking about depression is very, very important, because that starts a conversation and it gets people to be maybe a little less ashamed of what they might be feeling. And you know, this isn't something that I had when I was in high school. At my high school, we didn't have any resources for mental health. We never had anybody come talk to us and explain what it is. So it's amazing that you guys are even here and being able to listen to these stories.
The first time that I spoke with FFDA, and I told my advisor at high school that I was going to speak about depression. The first thing she said to me was, well, you're not going to mention the name of the school. You're not going to mention where you go to school, right? Because that would look bad for us. And at the time I thought, oh my goodness, I'm ruining the reputation of the school. I'm ruining my reputation. But I think that that's just totally not true. That it's, you know, I think that you're in high school, it's going to be, you know, an interesting 4 years. And I think that it's really important that if you are struggling with something, let some of your close, trusted friends know, social worker, guidance counselor, whoever. I think that's really, really important.
Talk to somebody, anybody, whether it's a friend first and then a parent, and it really depends on the different types of relationships you have with people, and also what type of person that person is, the person you want to talk to is, because a lot of people don't understand mental health issues. Even if they're your parents and they really do love you, they might not completely understand what you're going through. So if you talk to one person and it doesn't work, if they don't give you the support that you wanted, then just tell another person. Keep looking until you find somebody. And if you're not afraid, definitely I encourage seeking professional help, seeing one of your school social workers or guidance counselor. It's
not just social stigma that keeps people from getting help, at least in my case. It was also the stigma that I felt towards myself, that, you know, this would make me weak, this isn't okay, and so I kind of internalized a lot of those beliefs. You're having a struggle doesn't characterize you in any certain way. You know, if your friend told you, you know, they had cancer, you'd be like, oh, you're cancerous, like, you know, it's not, there's not really a good, fair portrayal of people who are struggling. And so I think that realizing that you yourself shouldn't stigmatize how you're feeling is really important.
The easiest way for me to tell my parents was to actually email them. I was here at school, and since I'm from Chicago, my parents were there, and I didn't feel comfortable calling them. I didn't want to have to vocalize my feelings, so I just wrote it all down and sent it in an email, and that was the easiest way for me. And then once I got to the seeking professional help, I kind of just sat down, and this was the first time I'd ever talked to anybody, and I just spit it all out. And it was really nice to get that off my chest, because I'd never really told anybody the full story like that.
I felt from telling my parents, it's the first people I told, I found it was helpful to tell them sort of in chunks actually. I wasn't able to kind of just spit it all out. And I kind of said, you know, one day I'd come back from school and say, oh man, I was feeling, you know, really down all day, or I'm feeling so sad it's difficult to get my work done. Just kind of in bits and pieces, and finally they put that whole picture together, which I think is not always an effective strategy, because a lot of people aren't perceptive enough to put that all together. And I know it's often, I found it would be a lot easier to tell people sort of with my actions, whether it be something self-destructive that I was doing or failing grades or something. It's a lot easier to, you don't have to use your words to show it that way. But of course, it's in the end a lot more effective to be able to talk and get help before you have to resort to those actions.
I reached out to my mom kind of when my depression hit like a tipping point, and I was having suicidal thoughts every day, and I was scared that she wasn't going to take me seriously when I wanted to sit down and talk with her, and I was scared she was going to, like, you know, stand up from the table and walk away. So the way that I did it was when we were in the car together on the highway is when I brought it up, so that she physically couldn't leave the conversation, and it ended up being like not the big deal that I thought it would be. But I feel like for some people, approaching your parents about it might not be an option for you. So another point that we want to drive home is just don't be afraid to reach out to guidance or someone at school if you feel uncomfortable. They want to help and they're here for you.
If you are struggling, tell somebody. I went 4 years with only one person knowing that I was depressed, and that was an extremely big mistake. I could have gotten the help that I needed much sooner if I had just told other people. Whether it had been my parents or somebody at school, it was way too long to be kept a secret. As far as helping friends, you know, I wouldn't push a friend to tell them or to have them tell you that they're depressed. But if you see that one of your friends might be withdrawing or seems like they're upset a lot, I would just make sure that they know that you're there for them. Make sure that they know that you care about them, and, you know, offer help if the opportunity arises.
If they tell you not to tell anyone, if they say I'm depressed, especially if they say, you know, I'm thinking of suicide, if you ask, are you thinking of suicide, and you're really worried about that, you're not going to plant that idea in their head. They've either already thought of it or it doesn't make sense to them why someone would kill themselves. Asking those questions is not going to send them over the edge. So ask those questions, and if they say, don't tell anyone, if you're Colin's girlfriend, don't listen to Colin, don't listen to that person, because, as I was saying earlier, it's better to lose a friend for a little while than to have them spiral. Be bold with that. And if you are that, or if you are struggling yourself, and you tell someone and you feel like they aren't reacting in a way that you need them to react, keep pushing people, and don't be scared.
Yeah, definitely don't give up on reaching out for help if you feel like the first person that you go to, you know, doesn't connect you with you know, the help that you need. And also, I would say, when it comes to helping a friend, definitely don't be afraid if they're going to be mad at you for a while, because they'll get over it and eventually probably thank you for helping. When I got out of the hospital in high school, I felt way too scared and embarrassed to tell my friends or to tell anyone that I was going to school with what had happened or where I just was. I was in like a locked psychiatric unit, and I was really, the reason why I was scared and embarrassed is because I felt like if I had told everyone where I just was, that they would make fun of me and say, oh, you were in like a mental hospital, you were in like a loony bin or something like that, and you're crazy. And that was really what I was most afraid of. And I think a good example of like people perpetuating stigma, I remember once I was in the cafeteria and I was sitting with all my girlfriends during the day, and I overheard one of them, and this was like a friend of mine, they were talking about another girl that they didn't like, and they said, oh, she's so bipolar, she's so crazy and bipolar. And obviously to say the word bipolar with a negative connotation, I think that's a good, a good example of people having misconceptions about mental illness and not really knowing, and what you end up doing is you make other people feel bad. So that's one example of like what it's like to have to deal with stigma.
For me, the one word that really got to me was crazy. I was extremely afraid of being labeled as crazy. I already felt different than everybody else. I thought nobody felt the same way as me. And I was extremely worried that once they found out that I was different, they would label me as crazy. And then another phrase that really bothered me was when people would say, like, they did badly on a test or they messed something up, they say, oh, I'm gonna kill myself. That one would really bother me because it'd be like, well, last night I was thinking about actually killing myself. So, you have to really watch what you're saying around people and make sure that you're not enforcing ideas that you're not meaning to.
Even if you yourself haven't been hospitalized for psychiatric illness, or if you haven't, if you don't know, so you don't know that there's someone else in the room who might be feeling, depressed or suicidal or something. I think just knowing that there are people, statistically, there's probably someone in the room. There are, a handful of people who will take that very seriously, and maybe who have a parent or a sibling who are struggling with this kind of thing, and to realize that it is a very serious issue. It's really difficult to understand if you haven't gone through it, but just take our word for it that it's a very, very painful thing to go through, as Maddie was saying. And it's a sort of pain that you can't understand unless you've been through it. So just keeping that in mind, if you hear people saying things, or if you're thinking of saying something like, oh my God, I'm crazy, or oh my God, I'm so depressed that I failed this test, I want to kill myself, that is alluding to a very, very deep issue that unfortunately many people struggle with.
You guys are really lucky to go to a high school where your faculty and your teachers care about you guys enough to want to bring this issue to the forefront. Because I know where I went to high school, similarly to Emma, they didn't really provide a lot of resources and they weren't extremely helpful. So just the fact that you have resources is something that's going to be extremely beneficial to you guys.